Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Bennis podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 23, The Keys. Hello everyone! We made it to the end of Season 3. And yes, I say we, you and me, we have done this together. Wow, the end of Season 3. This is the 40th episode of Hot and Heavy, and I'm just going to say it. I'm pretty proud that I've kept this up. If you've known me at all in my life, you would know that sometimes I tend to lose steam with projects. And so I'm really proud that I've kept this going, and I plan to keep it going. It doesn't necessarily get easier as time goes on. I mean, I'm on my 40th episode. Certain points are easier. I'm getting better with trying to be organized and getting my notes ready and kind of practicing because I'll be honest, editing this podcast is my least favorite part of the process, but it is a necessary part. If I release this without editing it, holy crap, you guys would be like, what is wrong with her brain? I mean, she can't even speak sometimes. Yeah, it's true. Sometimes I have to re-say things like 5 or 6 times, and there's a lot of swearing. So anyway, editing is so necessary, but it is the bane of this whole process for me. But you know, I'm getting better. And the more I do it, the more I learn how to record in order for maybe the editing to be less painful. Anyway, you don't need to know the whole background. This is all to say that I'm really proud of myself that I've gotten to the 40th episode, and I'm just going to keep going until that season 9 series finale, and I hope you stick with me. So to mark the end of the season 3, I had this idea the other day. I was on my walk and I said, I want to do something to sort of cap the season. You know, it's kind of nice, you know, just like a season finale. They always try and do something special or a little bit more bold. So I decided to create a montage of my favorite Elaine moments from season 3. I recorded it this week. It's me doing my interpretation of the Elaine moments and released it on the Hot and Heavy Instagram account. And if you're not following Hot and Heavy on Instagram, please follow Hot and Heavy on Instagram. You can find it at Hot Heavy Elaine. That's the Instagram account for this podcast, Hot Heavy Elaine. And yeah, so it remains to be seen if this was a good idea, but I enjoyed making it. I hope it makes you smile. And if not, I apologize you wasted 2.5 minutes watching it, but I had fun. It's just me doing really dumb impressions of Elaine throughout the season. And yeah, it's on the Instagram account now, and I think I'm just going to keep doing it for every season. And I might rewind and do a season 1 and a season 2. Maybe I'll combine those two since, well, Elaine wasn't really in season 1 very much. So yeah, that's the new thing I'm going to be doing. Also, I wanted to mention that I am working on getting Hot and Heavy on iTunes. It's been an ordeal. And truth be told, I've hit roadblocks and then just given up for a little bit. But then I get back into it and going like, this is stupid. It needs to be on iTunes for it to be like a viable podcast. I think I found the root of the issue. I just kept getting denied access to submit a podcast. So I think I found the issue, and I just need to get on the phone with an actual human being. Oh my gosh, what a concept. So I'm hoping to do that very soon, and I'll keep you guys updated on that. But in the meantime, I am releasing it now on Amazon Music. So if you have the Amazon Music app, you can find Hot and Heavy on that platform. So I'm excited about that. And that was so easy to put Hot and Heavy on Amazon. I think I did it within 10 minutes. And I'm like, hey, iTunes, take notes here. This was so easy. At any rate, I think I'm getting to the bottom of it. And hopefully Hot and Heavy will be on iTunes very soon. Okay, so let's get into this episode. The synopsis from my coffee table book for this episode is as follows. After one too many invasions of his privacy, Jerry takes away Kramer's spare keys to his apartment. Further key swapping ensues, with Kramer giving his keys to George to follow his acting dream in California. George then takes his spare keys back from Elaine, but forgets to give her spare keys back to Jerry. Elaine, meanwhile, is secretly writing a spec script for the show Murphy Brown. This episode was written by Larry Charles. All right, we start out in Jerry's apartment. This is sort of a montage. We see first that Jerry is getting up in the middle of the night to get some water, and the door is a little bit open. And Kramer is in there. It scares the shit out of Jerry. He was borrowing his popcorn popper. And then we just see a series of scenes to illustrate how much Kramer is taking advantage of having Jerry's keys. So we see the popcorn popper incident. Then we see Kramer taking a bath, which again is very inconsistent. He's gone back and forth about being in a tub of hot water. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that now. Anyway, he's taking a bath when Jerry really needs to pee. He's coming home and, it's one of those emergencies. We've all been there. And then we see Jerry approaching his door with a woman. It's clearly the end of the date, and, they're probably going to be getting it on. Right as Jerry's going in for a kiss, out walks Kramer from his bedroom with a woman, and that was it. Jerry says, "You know what? I can't do this anymore. I want my keys back." And Kramer tries to defend himself, and Jerry says, "No, I've had enough. I want my keys back." So that's our introduction to what the issue is with the keys. And real quick, I wanted to mention the actresses we see in the final scene of this montage. Jerry's girlfriend is played by Nina Tremblay, and it looks like she quit acting after Seinfeld or soon after Seinfeld. Her IMDb lists no credits after this episode and pretty few before, in fact. She's good. I like her. I think she does a good job with playing along with Jerry. I like that little playful moment. Kramer's girlfriend, Gucci, is played by C.K. Stiefel, and she will return in a later episode. She's the woman who dates George in the Cigar Store Indian episode. And not a ton of credits on IMDb, but there was a little bit of trivia on her that I loved, and I just wanted to mention really quick. From 2017 to 2020, she would spend 4 hours a week cuddling babies at a Chicago hospital. If you're not a baby person, I'm sure this sounds terrible, but now that my kids are older and not babies, far from being babies, I find myself really longing to just cuddle a baby. I don't want any more babies of my own. I know that for a fact, but I just read that little piece of trivia, and I thought that was really sweet. She had to stop in 2020. Obviously due to COVID restrictions, but I thought that was pretty cool. I would do that in a heartbeat. Anyway, she doesn't do much in this episode, not even any dialogue, so I'll hold my comments about her acting until that Cigar Store Indian episode. But so yeah, we will see her again. All right, moving on, we are in Jerry's apartment, and he is giving the keys to Elaine. And she asks about Kramer and how he's doing. Yeah, he's pretty upset, and he's acting really strange. And Elaine says, well, maybe you should just let him keep them. And Jerry says, no, he has had enough. And then there's a knock on the door. It's Kramer knocking on the door. What? And he looks over and says hi to Elaine, and she waves with the keys in her hand. And he said, okay. Oh, you've got the keys. And it gets awkward. Elaine just says, Jerry, just give him the keys back. And he says, well, Elaine, come on. And Kramer says, no, I don't want them back, and he broke the covenant of the keys. Elaine insists, though, just take the keys. They kind of have this back and forth. Ultimately, Jerry actually does try to give the keys back and says, this isn't worth Kramer being so upset, and this is getting pretty dramatic. So he does try and give them back. Kramer says no, he doesn't want to. He doesn't deserve them. But he does want Jerry to give his spare keys back to him. And Jerry's a little bit taken aback, but he goes and gets them, and it's a ginormous ring of keys, about 2,000 keys, gives them back to Kramer. So the purpose of this scene, we see the A story of Jerry and Kramer's key drama progress. And my take, I think Elaine is so out of line here to put Jerry on the spot to give Kramer the keys again. No, it's her compassion for Kramer that's making her do this, but I'm on Jerry's side here. And with Elaine specifically, it's not like she's a stranger to what a nuisance Kramer can be when he's in your apartment a lot. I mean, he dated her roommate, Tina. She was super bothered, and he even walked in on her naked. So yeah, I'm Team Jerry here. I think it was pretty inappropriate for Elaine to just try and give the keys back against Jerry's will. Ultimately, yes, he tries to give them back too. But yeah, for her to kind of take the reins on that, I didn't agree with that. Moving on, we're at Monk's. Kramer gives his keys to George, but there's a transaction and George now needs to get his keys from Elaine to give to Kramer. And Kramer talks to George really, he kind of opens up and says how having Jerry's keys, it was bad for him. It was like a fantasy world. And then he starts in on George and how George is living in the darkness and he can barely see George. Kramer even goes over to his side of the booth and asks George about yearning. George is kind of like, Kramer, you're freaking me out, all right? Look, I'm not wasting my life. I'm living my life. And Kramer is quick to point out, well, you have no job, no money, no woman, no prospects, nothing on the horizon. I mean, no conceivable reason to get up in the morning. Well, George tries to say, well, I like to get the daily news. Bottom line, Kramer is going to California. He needs a new start. And plus, he got the acting bug from that Woody Allen movie. These pretzels are making me thirsty. That was one line. And you got fired. Well, doesn't matter. And he invites George to come along. And George says, no, I'm staying here. There's no Elaine in this scene, but I did want to mention that I really love this scene. It's rare to see a Kramer and George scene. I think before we saw it with them going to the busboy's house and, trying to help him out and stuff. But it's a really special thing. And I love the way it's played, especially because Michael Richards here, he's giving this performance as Kramer in this like enlightened state and just different, it's a different Kramer than we're used to seeing. And the whole like kind of questioning George, it's a fantastic dynamic for these two characters, and these two actors do it beautifully. So I really enjoyed that scene. All right, moving on, we are at Elaine's apartment now. George is over there trying to get his keys from her because Kramer says they're key brothers, so he needs to give his spare keys to Kramer. And Elaine says, fine, but I need my keys back because I should give mine to Jerry since Jerry gave his to me. But George doesn't have her keys with him, so it's just a big old key tangle. So she agrees reluctantly, but goes to get her keys. And while she's passing George, he just picks up a folder of hers and she's like, can you put that down, please? I gotta get some new friends. The purpose of this scene, just more progression of this A story, more key drama. My take, I find all the back and forth about who gets whose keys, I find it tiresome because it just doesn't make any sense that George and Elaine would have like these strong feelings about whose keys they have. I think it's a very straightforward transaction. If you have someone's spare keys, then that person should have yours. And so I just feel like they're trying to extract all this conflict and it doesn't pay off. I do love that there's a little precursor moment to the snooping that happens later when George picks up that folder and she snatches it away from him. And I also love the line, I got to get some new friends. This will be sort of an ever-present theme for Elaine throughout the series, as we know. All right, next scene, we are at Jerry's apartment. Jerry's worried about Kramer. He hasn't seen him and he's trying to convince George to open his apartment. And George doesn't feel right about it, but you know what? He's going to do it, and while they're looking, Newman comes up and scares the crap out of him. Jerry asks him and then threatens him, tell me where Kramer is. And then Elaine is approaching, and Newman pulls Elaine to him for protection. Finally, he tells them that Kramer was ticked off about the keys and blames Jerry for it, and he's left for L.A. Then we cut to Kramer, and he's driving his car, happy, listening to music. Then we hear this sound. Sounds like his car is breaking down. Then we go back, and it's later in the apartment. Jerry is so upset that Kramer left, and, Kramer drove him to it. He had no choice. And that he tried to apologize, and he even tried to give the keys back. Right, Elaine? I tried to give them back. And she agrees, but that it was complete bullshit. What did you say? I didn't say anything. Yeah, she sure did say something, but Jerry's not getting anything out of her. George is smirking in the background. So Jerry says, I'm going to call Kramer's mom. He gets Kramer's mom on the phone, Babs, as we'll later find out. And she's listening to some very loud opera, which happens to be Pagliacci, the sad clown that makes an appearance in a later episode with Crazy Joe Davola. But anyway, the Pagliacci's super loud. She's drunk out of her mind. Jerry can't get any answers out of her. And then we cut back to seeing Kramer's car smoking. And, well, he needs to hitchhike now. The purpose of this scene, we see Kramer's plot, which is the B story here. He's going off to California. And my take on this scene, I'm not a fan of how it starts out in the hallway. I know that Jerry and Larry love this kind of old Hollywood detective interrogation, fast talking vibe. I don't know. I'm just not a fan. And then later, when they're in the apartment, I love Elaine's insult to Jerry that she quietly mumbles. It's great. That moment's enhanced also because George totally heard what Elaine said and then he's just smirking to himself. It's so enjoyable. Always love when Elaine and George are in on something together, even something as small as this. It's just a little moment, but I love that George is just smiling in the background, enjoying it. Next, we're at Jerry's apartment and then at Monk's. Jerry returns from what looks like a road trip and he's locked out. So he goes to Monk's and he calls Elaine from the payphone, but it goes to voicemail. Her answering machine. Her answering machine picks up, so she's not home. We cut to Kramer real quick. He's on the back of a motorcycle. The guy who's driving the motorcycle is telling him about a terrible accident he was on that exact road, blah, blah, blah. Back to Monk's. George arrives, and Jerry's super excited. He saves the day, but he doesn't feel right about letting him into Elaine's place to get the keys. He's like, what's the big deal? You just can't break into someone's apartment. That's why you took Kramer's keys. But Jerry says, look, technically they're his keys because she has his keys. So it's just this whole circular argument about the keys. They almost get into a fight. Then once again, we cut to Kramer. He's now in this hippie van telling the story about the keys, but in a really dramatic way. And there's some creepy people with him. Moving on to the next scene. They're at Elaine's apartment. Jerry is still trying to explain why this isn't a bad thing and that cutting out the middleman, blah, blah, blah. George says, okay, yeah, I don't know how I missed that. Maybe because it's a crockish. Yeah. What was that? George's turn to mumble an insult to Jerry. Cut back to Kramer. Now he's in a truck, looks like a semi, with this sexy driver, and they're flirting a little bit. And he tells her how he always wanted to drive a truck, so she pulls him into the seat and he starts fucking it up right away. Big surprise. So this sexy trucker is played by Sharon Barr. She has a lot of credits from very popular shows in the 80s, a few in the 90s, and she's actually known for doing a lot of offbeat Broadway productions. And I think she's perfect for this role. She has the right look. She's a great match for Kramer. I like that she's a bit older, I think it's very fitting for who Kramer would be attracted to. So I think it's great. Really short appearance by Sharon Barr, but I think it's fun and she does it well. All right, so now Jerry and George are in Elaine's apartment. They're snooping around, trying to find the keys. During their snoop fest, they find something on Elaine's desk. It's a spec script for Murphy Brown. And as they're both looking at it and kind of laughing at her about it, in comes Elaine and catches them. You weasels! Oh, she just lays into them. They're trying to blame it on the other. And Jerry says, it was funny. And she says, who gave you permission to go through my... You thought it was funny? Yeah, what I saw was just a first draft. And Jerry explains how he was locked out, and she's still pissed about it. She doesn't care. She's mad at George. He can't be trusted. And she's trying to throw them out, but he still needs his keys. And so everyone wants their keys back. But the keys that they're handed aren't their keys, so that's where we end it. And then we go back to Kramer. He's made it to California, apparently. He seems content, roller skating on the Venice boardwalk. The purpose of this scene, we get an introduction to Elaine's very small mini C story that she's writing a script for Murphy Brown. In my take, once again, Elaine has to put up with these idiots as her friends, and especially Jerry laughing at her. Elaine's writing a sitcom. God, what a dick. So for those of you who might not know, what is a spec script? I will tell you. It's also known as a speculative screenplay, which is a non-commissioned and unsolicited screenplay. It's usually written by a screenwriter who hopes to have the script optioned and eventually purchased by a producer, production company, or studio. So I wanted to include that because I remember watching this episode when it came out, and I thought in my young mind, not knowing what a spec script was, I thought Elaine had been hired to write for Murphy Brown. So the rest of the episode didn't really make sense to me, and also feeling like if she got hired, why was Jerry such a jerk laughing at her about it? So anyway, if you didn't know what a spec script was, now you do. Once again, the key stuff is just not my favorite. And then at the end, when no one gets the right keys back, it just stresses me out for no reason. It's oddly frustrating. So moving on. We're back at Jerry's apartment, and Elaine's just kind of dejected a little bit and explaining, well, I just thought I could write a Murphy Brown. And Jerry asks, well, is that something you really want to do? She says, I don't know, maybe. Those writers make a lot of money. And then Jerry very smugly mansplains show business to her. It's hard work. You got to watch the show, study it, and get a sense of the characters. She's like, can I just watch the show? She mumbles something again, insulting to Jerry. I like it. Rule of 3. She did it first, George did it second, and she has to do it again. Love it. And they're actually watching Murphy Brown so that she can, I guess, do what Jerry is mansplaining to her. And then they see Kramer. Elaine, it's Kramer! It's Kramer! He's on Murphy Brown! They freak out, and then we cut to Kramer in his episode of Murphy Brown as Stephen Snell, Murphy Brown's new secretary. And for those of you who might not be familiar, we used to watch Murphy Brown in our house growing up. Murphy Brown it was like a revolving door of new secretaries. She could never keep a secretary, so it was just this kind of running joke on the show. So it's very fitting that Kramer got a guest starring role because it was probably just one episode. The purpose of the scene, we get a resolution to what happened to Kramer and hear Elaine's explanation of why she wanted to write a Murphy Brown script. My take on this scene, the writing is very meta. You know, it's a chance for Jerry, Larry, I think, to explain what writers do on the show. It's fine, but I do hate the mansplaining. Who doesn't? If you're a woman, of course you hate it. And I'm glad Elaine just cuts him off. Okay, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper here, even though it's such a small part of the episode. I like that they show Elaine doing this. I mean, it's so minuscule as far as a plot goes, and it's really just for the purpose of this payoff for Elaine and Jerry to see Kramer on Murphy Brown at the end. But the reason that I like that they show her doing this and that she's attempting this spec script is that she's a writer after all. And even though she has a job in her field, she's still searching for something that will be more fulfilling, more lucrative. It's a moment of career vulnerability that I love here with Elaine. And I think a lot of us can relate. You know, we know she's not making a lot of money. She's not making a ton of progress at the office. So she's considering another field where she can use her writing talents. I think it's very believable. So I enjoyed that they gave Elaine this moment and this kind of peek into like, hey, you know, even if you are in a job in your chosen field, it's kind of like, well, I'm still a writer. Maybe I can do this because I just need to make more money and I want to be more fulfilled. So really fun choice for her. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break and I will see you on the other side. Attention writers, dreamers, and creative powerhouses. Do you have an idea for an existing television show, but just don't know what to do with it? It's all there in your head, just waiting to come out. But how the heck will it go from your brain to the screen? That's where I can help. Hi, I'm Rachel Golden, aspiring screenwriter and creator of the Sexy Specs Workshop. I have written over 3,000 spec scripts during my career, and let me tell you, I have a lot of wisdom to pass on to you. Oh, don't let the name fool you. Your spec script doesn't have to be about sex. It's just a way to describe how much people will want to hire you after reading your work. It's just a small example of my talent with words. I've sent spec scripts to all the shows you know and love. Spencer for Hire, Simon and Simon, Airwolf, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, Hardcastle and McCormick, just to name a few. I'm so experienced. I could probably write a sexy spec in my sleep. Again, just to reiterate, your script doesn't have to include any type of intimacy at all. As an active celibate, I can tell you that sex doesn't always sell. The Sexy Specs Workshop is a one-day course that will teach you everything from story structure to the best type of manila envelope to use for your masterpiece. I'll explain how hearing nothing for months, years, or even decades doesn't mean you should lose hope. And that even if the show has been off the air for years and years, your spec script could be what they need for a reboot. And I'll also share how cease and desist orders have many loopholes. If the Sexy Specs Workshop sounds right for you, please call me at 555-SEX. That's 555-SEX, and I will put you on the list for my next session. I know my phone number may suggest it, but I want to say again, this is not a workshop that teaches anything remotely involving intercourse. The sexy in Sexy Specs merely refers to that desire the television people will feel when they read your script. That's all. The Sexy Specs Workshop. Have you got a great idea for that show? And we're back. The extras for this episode, there was an inside look. And I just wanted to mention something really quick here where Jerry was talking about how impressed he was with the operation of Murphy Brown, because they filmed that scene with Kramer on the Murphy Brown set, and it was their crew and their director and everything. So for Jerry to witness just the well-oiled machine that was that show, he was like, wow, that's where we want to get to. You know, that's a real network sitcom. We hope to get to that. Right now, we're like a jalopy, like the amateur version of this. So I just thought that was really interesting when you see, you know, how a really seasoned show works. And then you're like, okay, we need to learn from this. I thought that was interesting. And then in the notes about nothing, there were some JLD quotes I'd like to share. And the first one is about how Julia felt that having a child, though right for her, wouldn't be right for Elaine. Quote, I don't think pregnancy would work on the show. Being unmarried and stuff might not be too funny. End quote. Yeah, I think she's right. Usually when someone has a baby on a show, it is the death of that show, unless it's a show about babies. And within months of this episode, she gave birth to her first son, Henry. When Jerry calls Elaine to get his keys and leaves a message, so when he's in Monk's and he's locked out, an early draft of the script had an outgoing message we were supposed to hear as an audience from Elaine. And the outgoing message was this: I'm not a single woman living alone. I'm married to a very rough-hewn mute with a poisonous snake. So leave your message at the beep. It's not that funny. I see what they're going for, but I think it was right to be cut. Julia was aware that Elaine's relationship to the male characters was important to Seinfeld's unique dynamic. Quote, treating me as one of the boys is, in part, what is good about the show. The situation in reality is the same as on the show, but much to the dismay of those who analyze Seinfeld too deeply, I'm not there to represent the female point of view. I'm just another actor in the cast. I have no agenda except to be funny. Okay, I absolutely love this quote. And I almost didn't include it because I feel like I've included in this podcast a lot of the same sort of sentiment, a lot of quotes from her. But I kept it in because of that last line where she says, I have no agenda except to be funny. That part of the quote, it resonated because of a recent discussion I actually had with some friends. And okay, it was about the series And Just Like That, which was the Sex and the City reboot. So I've had many thoughts and stuff about that show, how they executed that entire series. But related to this quote, just to give a little bit of a rundown, the original Sex and the City basically had no diversity. So they really remedied that with this reboot. They have a ton of diversity, which I am all for. Of course, representation is so important. But I also felt that the purpose of every person of color or minority that they brought onto the show, I felt like majority of what they were brought on was to just be that identity. And why that bothers me is that it makes it almost uncomfortable when they bring on, for example, they brought in an Indian woman, Seema. We were always reminded, hey, I'm an Indian woman. I'm a non-traditional Indian woman. It's almost as if every one of these characters who were brought on to fill the diversity quota, it was like they weren't really fleshed out characters. It was just very blatantly like, please be this person of color, and that's who you are 100%. While I applaud them for, bringing on a lot of people and diversity which they needed. It was also done in a way that was a little bit cringy. I wish they could just bring on these characters and flesh out what they're about, and they just happen to be that race or orientation. I'm not sure if I really explained that too well, but to bring this back to my original point in relation to this Julia Louis-Dreyfus quote is that I love her approach of saying that, look, her number one job is to be funny. And the facts are she is a woman playing a strong, badass character who happens to be a woman. But let's focus more on the character traits that aren't assigned to her gender. The strength of Elaine, the badassness of Elaine, and of course the humor of Elaine. And then naturally the byproduct of that approach, I believe, is the progress of women in sitcoms. And that just comes naturally. And if her focal point and her approach to the character was to represent the female point of view with everything, I think that's when it fails. And I also want to say, I'll just end it with this. Believe me, I would rather shows like And Just Like That. And it's not just this show that I'm talking about, the Sex and the City reboot. I'm seeing it all over the place where it's like, okay, they're really putting in a lot of minorities, a lot of, representation, which I'm all for. I would rather have it that way and attempt it a little clunky, in execution versus not attempting it at all. And this is, it's sort of necessary when we want things to change and things to evolve. Sometimes we have to swing that pendulum a little bit too far and maybe make some missteps. And these aren't missteps that are, detrimental to the efforts of creating more diversity and representation in entertainment at all. But I do think sometimes when I watch these things, I'm like, okay, yeah, we have to be really heavy-handed with it because we don't want to be too light-handed with it. So I think people are erring for like, well, let's just really mention it all the time versus it just being played out. Or, hey, okay, it's an Indian woman, but we don't need everything to be about her Indian identity. I hope this makes sense, and maybe I'm not saying it very well. But again, just the way Julia Louis-Dreyfus explains that, look, the indisputable facts are obvious that I am a woman playing an independent woman in a sitcom full of men, and I don't need to approach it as that. I just need to approach it with humor and acting well and giving life to this character. And those byproducts of what I talked about, her having an impact on women in sitcoms and the landscape of female characters, that happens naturally. All right, so let's move on from that big ol' serious tangent. Oh, we were supposed to get a little bit more information as to why Jerry was so amused by Elaine writing a sitcom. So in a pre-production script, there was a line where Jerry says, she works at a publishing house. Her father is a celebrated novelist. She has a master's in French literature, and she's writing a sitcom. So I guess that gives a little bit more background of like, wait, why is she doing this? Her credentials do not match up, and she's pretty much above it. I think that's what was supposed to be conveyed with that line. And lastly, in the notes about nothing, Julia said she understood that the caliber of writing at Seinfeld was the result of a very talented team. Quote, Jerry himself is the happy-go-lucky side of Seinfeld, while Larry David, the co-creator and executive producer, supplies the cynical edge. If there's anything in the script that I, as a woman person, am uncomfortable with, Larry will listen and change it. He's the most open writer I've ever worked with, end quote. I love that. I love little tidbits about, her contribution and her, feedback getting listened to. That's always refreshing. Moving on to Contributor Corner, Greg's thoughts this week. He says, while this is a simple and somewhat boring premise, it is extremely choppy. The premise I now understand better living here in New York City. I realize people do give out spare sets of keys to friends for emergencies, and it's all about who is both trustworthy and also accessible when the need arises. Being from the Midwest, I never even thought to do this back home. The politics of it all shakes up this foursome. While Kramer makes the most sense, since he's right across the hall, he's more than abused the privilege. I'm surprised Jerry next goes to Elaine. This is a big deal considering she's an ex-girlfriend. George is the natural next option, and it blows my mind that George and Elaine have each other's keys. Are they that close at this point? I like that they are. Yeah, I guess I never thought about who had whose keys originally. But yeah, I don't know if it does make sense that he gives it to Elaine versus George. Maybe I feel like maybe it's just like he sees her first. Maybe that's it. And that's all that's based on. But yeah, I also see your point, Greg, with being from the Midwest and not really having this whole spare key thing. Now I think it's more if you live in a neighborhood with garages, maybe giving someone your code to your garage or something. But yeah, the whole concept, I know wasn't something I could relate to when I first watched this episode. But yeah, I think I was just like, well, I guess in New York they have to do that. And I do like that George and Elaine have each other's keys. I just like that Elaine and George have some kind of a relationship always. Next, Greg says, Kramer in this episode and the beginning of season 4 in LA is just lost on me. It was as if they promised Michael Richards a grand storyline and it just didn't pay off in any way. At the same time, Elaine, JLD in full pregnancy, hiding behind big coats, towel drying racks, and seat cushions, is gone after this episode for a while, so we have to soak in what they gave us of her here, which isn't a lot. Agreed. Yeah, there was nothing kind of in the behind the scenes as to why they chose this for Kramer. I'm going to get more into that in my final notes of the episode because I do have some opinions on that, so I will save that until then. Greg goes on to say, Elaine's line, I've got to get some new friends, makes me laugh every time. It's as if she knows these guys are idiots, and yet they're her closest pals. Agreed, and again, this is something that we'll see crop up every now and then with Elaine. She's sort of stuck with these guys. Deep down, I think she really does love them, but she knows they're not the best friends to have, and they don't bring out the best in her or each other. Greg's next thought, I love the moment where Elaine mutters to George and Jerry calls her out, but both George and Elaine are in on it. I can't explain how much I love George and Elaine versus Jerry in any situation. George instantly is cooler with Elaine on his side. Yes, I think I said almost everything you just said. And I guess I didn't specify. I love a George and Elaine plot together. But yes, when it's versus Jerry, there's just something sweeter about that. All right, and Greg's final thought, Elaine is writing a Murphy Brown and they needed way more time spent on that. The fact she is trying her hand at comedy writing should have honestly been the focus of this whole episode, given Jerry's career and how he knows show business. Instead, we get Kramer with the female Harry Hamlin trucker or with bikers or hippie cultists, none of which is funny at all. Full disclosure, I have written episodes of both The Office and Parks and Rec for fun. Jerry is right. You have to study the characters. I would have loved to have seen Elaine continue her writing. Wow. Yes. Okay. Again, I'm going to address what you talked about here in my final notes. I have thought about writing spec scripts, but I haven't. Really cool, Greg. I would love to read your Office and Parks and Rec scripts if you'd want to send them my way. But anyway, yes, I think that there's so much meat to this storyline of Elaine trying to do comedy writing. And yeah, I'll get more into that in a little bit. Thank you so much, Greg, for sending in your thoughts. And if you would like to become a contributor on Hot and Heavy, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. Moving on to my favorite Elaine moments. I love when Elaine catches Jerry and George. I love it. It always makes me laugh. The use of the word weasels, it just makes me laugh. It's so sort of odd and random. You don't hear it a lot. So it makes it really funny. A close second, I almost said the mumbling part. It was complete bullshit. I love that as well. But I think the playfulness of that weasels moment, because Jerry and George are like scrambling, throwing the papers at each other. It just gives it the edge. And I really like that moment. And my final notes. I'm not a big fan of this episode in general. I know they were trying to do something big and bold for the season finale, but all the Kramer stuff, it's too out there for me. I honestly hated all the cutaways to where Kramer's on his trip. And it's just such a time waster because they're not that funny. Elaine, scene swap, hello. We could have fleshed out this Elaine script writing for Murphy Brown so much. To Greg's point, it's a comedy script and Jerry's a comedian. I mean, instead of spending so much time with this motorcycle dude's monologue and this hippie stuff in the van, like just not funny. If I'd feel differently if they were actually funny scenes with Kramer. And it's like, it's insane that like you have these cutaways to Kramer's trip, and yet they give majority of the funny to these guest actors. And nothing against those guest actors, but they're not given funny material. I just don't enjoy all of the Kramer stuff here. And I do think that the premise is strong with the keys. I think of course at some point Jerry's going to get sick of Kramer taking advantage of all the access he has to his apartment, but I just wish they'd elected to deal with it in a different way. This whole trip to California, like it just seems way too out there for me. And I think, as many of us know, and something that Greg mentioned as well, this is a lead-in for the beginning of this next season where they're in LA. And well, on that note, I guess I should mention, I will not be covering the first 4 episodes of season 4 because Elaine's not in them. JLD was gone on her maternity leave, but in the show, Elaine's gone on vacation with her boyfriend to Europe. And it's really a blessing in disguise. I really don't like those episodes. I am never a fan of shows when they like go off site for like an extended period of time. That's just me. I know it's supposed to be like exciting and fun for the show, but usually most of the time I find those episodes exhausting and not fun. So after this episode, the next one I'll be covering will be the 5th episode of season 4, which is The Wallet. Elaine's return to the series and JLD's return after having baby Henry. And I think that's all I can say about The Keys. And we're done with season 3. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.